So, Nora, Sam, thank you so much for being here. It's really wonderful to meet the people behind Nervana, the recovery app, and I'm excited to dive into your recovery stories. That's what we do here at Living Proof. We're very passionate about sharing these personal health journeys and raising hope for healing, hope that is very much grounded in neuroscience. So, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And let's start with you, Nora, if that's okay. I'd love to hear a little about your health journey, the journey that inspired your recovery at Nirvana. Could you just summarize the chronic symptoms that you faced and maybe some of the things that you did to try to overcome them? And then how you finally learned about the neuroplastic treatment approach, which I know did bring you lasting relief in the end. So, yeah, we'd just love to hear about your story.
Thank you. So I always say that my story begins in college, but after you recover and you start to understand a lot more about yourself, you realize it started a lot earlier. But for me, I felt like my story started when I was unfortunately in a car accident when I was an undergrad. I was at Cornell University in New York. My senior year, just walking on campus, going to class, I was hit by a car as a pedestrian. So it was a very traumatic experience in college, and I had to get rushed to the trauma center in a different state, actually, because Ithaca, New York, did not have a trauma center nearby. So, I had to get all of the workups, the scans, everything. And luckily, I didn't have any super lasting structural injury. And so, doctors thought my back pain would go away after a couple of weeks when my body healed. I was diagnosed with a concussion, but that also went away a few weeks later. Now, the pain did not go away like doctors expected. And so I was still struggling with chronic back pain for years after that, about 5 years. And I tried absolutely everything, as many of your audience will have also felt. Um, I went to chiropractors and physical therapists and acupuncturists and clinical massage, which is actually not fun. It sounds like it's fun because
Yeah.
you're like, oh, it's massage. It's not fun. And so I was doing that about 3 to 5 times a week for years. So it was consuming a lot of my life just trying to manage this pain, and nothing was very durable. I would sometimes find temporary relief, and then it would just come back a few hours later. I felt like I was constantly just like shifting my back. I was always putting lumbar support behind my chairs. I wouldn't carry heavy things anymore. I had to have like friends and family carry my luggage for me. I would never be able to lift it over in the overhead compartment. And so I really just felt like that was going to be my life. I was starting to get pretty desperate, so I started to move into some more involved procedures. I was getting steroid injections in my back every few months, which is kind of intense. Like you'd get put under with anesthesia. And then I got a procedure called nerve ablation, where they burned the nerves in my back, and I still was experiencing pain. So it just felt like I was going to live with this forever. Now, fast forward a little bit when I was graduated from college, I was in New York City managing this back pain, going to these appointments every few days, and I started to experience a different set of symptoms. I started to have chronic GI inflammation and bloating. I essentially looked like I was 8 months pregnant at all times, no matter what I ate. Even if I didn't eat anything for, that many hours, I would still just be very distended and uncomfortable. And so I thought this was totally unrelated to my back pain. This is a totally different set of symptoms. And so I attributed it naturally to my food that I was eating or, some sort of bug in my stomach. So I got, antibiotics. I went to GI specialists. I tried many, many different diets. Once again, nothing helped. So I was just managing this, trying to like constantly figure out if there's a different diet I should go on. And then finally, kind of the third chapter in my story is when I went to graduate school. I went to Harvard Business School. I got my Master's of Science and my MBA. And while I was there, managing my back pain, managing my GI issues, I started to experience insomnia really badly. Like it wasn't just one bad night of sleep, it was basically like 9 to 12 months of interrupted sleep or lack of sleep almost every night out of the blue. Like I used to be a great sleeper and I don't really know what happened. I was very upset. I went to psychiatrists, I went to all these different physicians in the Harvard system and nothing worked. Like I would take really strong sleep medicine and I just would not sleep that night. So I just
Mm.
felt like I was kind of a mess at this point. I'm like in my mid 20s and everyone's having a great time around me and I'm just like playing whack-a-mole with all these different chronic issues, constantly scrolling, Reddit and YouTube and trying to find success stories. And then I'll pause there, but that's where I found neuroplastic recovery. But I'll see if you have any questions about the journey.
Wow, gosh, what a long journey and really severe, debilitating symptoms. And what I can hear there is you really brought your A game to trying to heal
Oh
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I brought my like type A. I was top of my class most years, and so I really just wanted to like get rid of these symptoms. I wanted to just move on, and little did I know I was really perpetuating them because I was so identified with recovery, just really, really wanting to get rid of it.
Absolutely. And I deeply empathize with that, both the part about having symptoms at a young age, early 20s, and seeing everybody getting on with their life around you, and you're dealing with symptoms, going to specialist appointments, this long, frustrating, distressing journey of trying to figure out what is going on in your relatively young body that seems to be falling apart, and then just trying everything, working so hard on it. But
Yeah.
that actually frustrating the healing process without you knowing it, right? Like without you being aware. Yeah, deeply empathize. And so, how did you actually come across the neuroplastic approach? This is obviously a very different treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. So to this point in the story, no one had ever mentioned anything related to, how your mind can influence your body. I knew that that was the case for, simpler physical symptoms, but not something like chronic pain from an accident. So nobody had ever mentioned that to me. And while I was in graduate school, I was honestly at my mental rock bottom. I was on vacation with my boyfriend at the time, now my husband. We were in Portugal in business school. We had a lot of friends around us. And it sounded like so fun, but I was just having the worst time. Like mentally, I felt like I was just losing my marbles. I was not sleeping. I had this pain. I felt like I couldn't eat anything. And I just felt like my body was completely failing me. And two things happened at the same time. It's like fate or something. One was that a friend of mine sent me a meditation app, and I started to meditate for the first time in a way that actually made sense to me. I tried before and was not receptive. And the second thing that happened was when I returned to campus, I saw a poster on campus that said, "Do you have chronic back pain? Have you tried everything? Enroll in a clinical research study." Now, I have a biopharma background, and so I think like I was a little interested in what this research study was. And I called up the principal investigator, and it was Dr. Michael Danino, who's a really preeminent researcher in Boston. And he was researching psychophysiologic symptom relief therapy, PSRT, on chronic back pain. And I'd never heard of this before, but essentially it was the mind body approach. It was taking a lot of what Dr. John Sarno had pioneered years ago and bringing in like the new pain neuroscience around how your brain and your body are connected and how, things like stress, emotions, even personality patterns, that same type A personality trait that I've always had and admired and, has served me well is also part of what was contributing to my pain. And so I was pretty reluctant to accept this. I was resistant at first. It took a couple conversations with the physician for me to get on board, but I figured I have nothing to lose. Let me give it a shot. So I was a participant in this clinical trial focused on back pain for a couple of months. We met virtually on Zoom. I think it was weekly. And I honestly did not think anything was super revolutionary until I started realizing my pain was just gone. Like it wasn't even a gradual reduction. It was just like something clicked in my brain where I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. And not only that, but my GI issues and my insomnia, I was able to self manage. And now I feel fully recovered, which is incredible because it happened so quickly.
Wow. So you said it sort of suddenly clicked.
Yeah.
How did that happen? What do you think resonated with you about what you were being told, the neuroscience that you were learning about? How did it help you to connect dots with your own life and your own symptoms and make sense of those symptoms that had been so puzzling and so intractable
Yeah.
before?
I think so. The trial was pretty simple. People always ask, like, what was the secret sauce in the trial? I mean, ultimately, I do feel it was very beneficial, which is why I put it all into Nervana. So Nervana recapitulates that clinical trial. But essentially, it was simple. It was teaching you about the brain-body connection, and it was also doing a couple of exercises that helped you become your own detective. So, for example, we learned about how, if you have a neuroplastic symptom, if you have a symptom where, your pain is worse and your body's structurally fine, there's no tissue damage that explains your pain, then sometimes it is around your personality pattern. And I was like, what? What does that mean? Like, my personality can affect my pain? That doesn't make any sense. But then we would do some exercises like journal about it, journal about, like, is your nervous system constantly upregulated? I remember actually, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I remember that the physician, when he was trying to kind of convince me that this was legit, he was saying, like, are you the type of person that checks your sent emails right away after you send an email? And I was like, all the time. I do that every time I send an email. I go back and I check it. And he was like, why do you think you do that? And I was like, I don't know. I guess I'm type A. Like, I want it to be perfect. And those little moments that were not that revolutionary, they started to accumulate where I was like, maybe my hypervigilance, my ambition has also caused my body to constantly be bracing in this state of fight or flight. Like if I had a typo in that email, it was going to be life or death. And so it just started to make a little more sense to me. I started to also realize that sometimes I would have pain and sometimes I wouldn't. And so the notion that, if you have a structural injury in your body, if you just tore your ACL because you were skiing, your knee should hurt every time you walk on it, right? Like, until you fix it, your knee is going to hurt. And that wasn't the case for me. Sometimes I would have pain when I carried my backpack, but I would also try to go to the gym and I would not have pain carrying something heavier. So those sorts of moments, clicked with me. And honestly, the cherry on top was when I started to realize that, the pain, the insomnia, and the GI symptoms, and I struggled with chronic acne when I was in college as well, that I forgot about. All of those were just connected. And I think that was really the aha moment for me.
Yeah, fascinating. In my case, I think that what made it resonate is that I had the gift of desperation. I was kind of at rock bottom. I'd exhausted all my options in the medical model.
Yep.
I had a spinal stimulator implanted. That didn't even work. So in a way, that opened my mind, I think, to like, well, what else? What else could explain this?
Right.
And allowed me to sort of shift the paradigm. But I really dislike that often this approach is like a last resort for people once they've been
Yeah.
through so much. Like in your case, the surgeries, the procedures, that I mean, you tried everything. I would
Yeah.
just love it to not be the last resort for people. And I know
No.
that's what you're trying to do at Nervana. So we'll come on to that a bit later. But if you don't mind, I just want to turn to Sam
Yes.
and ask you the same question, really. Tell me about your health journey and what brought you eventually to the neuroplastic approach.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate Nora sharing her story as well, and you sharing some of your journey too. So I experienced severe, debilitating chronic pain for about 9 years. It started when I was 21. Mine did not have a traumatic injury to begin with. I was rock climbing and felt a bit of pain in my neck. And I was someone who treated everything with a lot of seriousness. And I also approached my care with a lot of, like, I must try every single thing at every point. And so over time, I tried physical therapy. I went to 8 different physical therapists. I got 40 injections of local anesthetic a week where my back is just bleeding and bruised, cortisone injections, an epidural injection, sort of everything under the sun. But the pain kind of also kept spreading. So I had terrible, terrible, like screaming, burning pain in my right neck, down my right scapula, down my right arm, into my hand, and then sometimes even over the top of my head, behind my eye, and into my jaw. And then at other times there was pain in both wrists, but it was predominantly that pattern. And so I was completely at a loss. I went to crisscrossed the country and luckily had the privilege to be able to do so, but went to as many of the best pain doctors in the country who really tried their best. But ultimately, nothing we did, nothing we found, nothing we talked about ever helped at all. Of course, perhaps a little bit of relief after a certain injection, but then the pain would come roaring back. And so I mean, this is 9 years. It's my entire 20s. I didn't really tell a ton of people. I told some people, and friends were really thoughtful and helpful with like carrying stuff for me, similar to Nora. But I was really struggling. I almost dropped out of grad school myself a couple of times because of how bad the pain was. I kind of couldn't feel like I could go on with this. I did end up actually having to leave work because of it. I worked in homelessness and housing for many years, which I loved, but it's good to be in person and work in shelter. And so the pain was just so bad that I was not able to kind of bring my best work. And so I had to step away from that. And ultimately just kept coming up to hurdle after hurdle of trying to find something that would work, trying something new. Somehow I kept hope that whole time that I would find something. I was on 3,600 milligrams of gabapentin a day, which is not only a lot of medication, but it's very hard to get it prescribed. And so endlessly trying new things and them not working. I had heard about neuroplastic symptom relief a couple years before I actually engaged with it because I thought it didn't make any sense. It seemed very woo-woo to me. It did not seem like something I had ever heard of. I was very entrenched in the biomedical view of pain, where, the pain is screaming at me right here. It must be in the muscle. It must be in the joint. I had every type of scan, though. I had x-rays, MRIs, a PET MRI, a nerve conduction test, and they all came back normal. Or they showed sort of mild bulging discs or something, nothing that could possibly explain the amount of pain I was having. And so I was stuck in that mindset. And after, as we're saying, sort of the last resort, exhausting everything else, I had this kind of wonderful experience at a friend of mine's wedding. So I spent a lot of my time, Nora was very type A and perfectionist. I spent a lot of my time kind of deeply anxious as well, where I was very much in fight or flight and constantly, I think, due to some trauma and upbringing and stuff like that, walking on eggshells at all times and always trying to not necessarily be perfect in my academics, but be perfect as a human being in relation to other people as much as I could. And so I went to a wedding with a dear friend and her partner, and it was a beautiful healing experience. I was part of only sort of chosen family, people who were so loving. And I had this day with no pain for the first time in 9 years. And that was really the moment. And this is, by the way, the first time I'm ever telling this story publicly. I've never actually shared it online before, so this is exciting. I'm glad to be doing it with living proof. And so at that wedding, I had the first day of no pain, which was insane to me because I was like, well, I guess I'm living with this forever. And after that, I was like, you know what? Neuroplastic might be a real thing. And so then I started reading everything I possibly could, listening to every podcast, Dr. Sarno's work, Dr. Schubiner's work, Dr. Clark's work, as much as I could understand. And then I tried to, of course, become the perfect patient and do everything I possibly could to be the perfect neuroplastic patient, which is actually kind of antithetical to getting better. And so had to eventually learn to let go. And we'll talk about this a bit later, but my recovery was quite a bit longer than Nora's. So it was 13 months, essentially, of treatment, and then having, even more recovery afterwards. But I consider myself now fully recovered. And even if I have, some pain come up, I feel completely able to deal with it and manage it and move forward with my life. It's just a very different way of living, I would say.
Wow. Oh my goodness. What an incredible journey. And I just want to say, I am so incredibly sorry for what you went through. 9 years of relentless pain. And then when you spoke about getting one day where you didn't have pain, the first day in 9 years, I mean, it's heartbreaking. It's a lost decade, isn't it?
Yeah, it really felt that way for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, I felt the same last decade, and I'm really honored that you're sharing this story with us. And I know when I was experiencing that, it felt quite lonely because I didn't really know anybody in my life that was going through something similar. And it's only later when I found the neuroplastic approach and connected with other people that you realize there are other people on this journey too. And I'm so sorry that you were one of them, and so glad that you're on the other side now and sharing your story. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, that was also the real joy in meeting Nora, was meeting someone else my age who was going through this. Hers was 5 years, mine was nine, but it's still, the real pain and suffering and the isolation that you feel with this, and the not being believed and trying to figure it out, was a real gift to me, I would say, and was really why I wanted to join Nervana as well.
Absolutely. I think community is so important. And even now, on the other side of recovery, we find at Living Proof that being part of a community of people who've recovered, who truly get the journey, and also now live in particular ways because of the knowledge of that journey,
Right.
it's just great to be around a community and to feel supported. So I'm so glad you guys found each other, and you're obviously doing amazing stuff together at Nirvana. So you both came to the neuroplastic approach via different routes. But then I'd just love to know for both of you what implementation of that approach looked like. So the neuroplastic approach is it's not like certain treatments where you might take a medication or do a procedure and expect relief shortly after. It takes time to learn the neuroscience behind chronic symptoms, to apply the recovery tools, even to make shifts in your life to the way you're living, to habits and patterns that might be quite ingrained. It takes time. So I just love to know for both of you, what did that implementation process look like? And I know it was different because Nora, you had a much shorter journey than Sam, but could you just both talk me through that? Perhaps Nora, if you could start.
Yeah, yeah. And thanks, Sam, for sharing. So exciting to be sharing these stories publicly to help others. So implementation is the number one question I feel like I get. I think sometimes you're absolutely right. Like people will sometimes think like, oh, well, it sounds like you're just jumping ahead. Like what did you actually do? And it's so hard to explain because everyone has a different blocker or everyone has to focus on different things in order to help their brain and bodies feel safe and kind of down regulate. So for me, I'll just give quick examples for each of my symptoms, like tangible examples after a lot of education. So, similarly to Sam, in my clinical trial environment, there was a ton of education. That was like the primary treatment was education. And I think it was Dr. John Sarno that said, like, the penicillin for this is education. And so, for me, for my back pain, and this was something we were taught. Of course, a lot of people who are familiar in the space know about somatic observation or somatic tracking. Starting to be with your pain rather than against it, lingering on it for just a moment longer rather than immediately shifting your body. So that was something I did often. Like I started practicing it as soon as I learned it, a couple times a day. So anytime I would feel pain in my lumbar, typically before learning about neuroplastic recovery, I would kind of take my hand and I would sort of massage my back and I would shift and I would and learning about somatic observation was a slightly different approach. I would first just linger. I would like close my eyes and just feel the back pain and I would feel the discomfort and the fact that I don't like it, but I would just settle there for an extra few seconds before shifting. And that was something so simple, but it really did rewire the way that my brain was treating my symptom. It was starting to welcome it and be a little more curious about it. And I know it's so cheesy, but like actually thinking, is it red? Is it blue? Does it move? What's the texture of it? Those sorts of cues. At first, I was like, "What are you talking about? It's like it's red. It sucks. I want it gone." But I think just like being a little more open to exploring what it actually feels like what is the raw sensation and that data was helpful for my pain. For my GI symptoms, I had a fear of food. And so, I felt like onions were off limits, garlic was off limits, sugar was off limit. Like all of these things were going to cause my inflammation. So once I learned about the mind body approach, and also I learned not just within the mind body treatment, but I also just learned about human beings and how hungry we are and how like, when you restrict something, you seem to want more of it. There was actually a book I read. This woman is not at all plugged into the neuroplastic recovery space, and it was not science backed whatsoever. But I think she wrote a book called The F-It Diet. So it's using the derogatory term, but the F-It Diet. And she basically just chronicles how she was hungry her whole life and constantly dieting. And then she decided one day, screw it. I'm going to eat whatever I want, whenever I want. And you know, basically, she was doing the neuroplastic recovery approach for digestive issues, where she was essentially like trying to retrain her fear of food. So I tried to do that. So every time I would have a thought like, oh no, Nora, you can't have that because that's going to cause this, I would actually go and eat like double of it. Like, and yes, I overate and maybe it wasn't the healthiest, but I had to physically challenge myself and do the thing that my brain did not want me to do in order to really combat it head on. So I ate a lot. That was my solution to my GI symptoms, was I just kind of ate whatever I wanted. And anytime I had a restrictive thought, I just told myself to do the opposite. Finally, when it comes to insomnia, that was one of the hardest symptoms to really get rid of. I would say I was, with insomnia, it's a little easier to accept the neuroplastic diagnosis because you really do know that stress and, ruminating thoughts are affecting your sleep. But it was really hard to get over it. And for me, it was safety affirmations. So every night before bed, when I was struggling with insomnia, I would just convince myself, I would literally repeat to myself, even if you get 0 hours of sleep, you will be okay. Even, actually, I want 0 hours of sleep. I'm looking forward to 0 hours of sleep. And obviously, this is, it's kind of BS. Like you're just pretending. But I would do this night after night until finally it was like fake it till you make it. I started to believe it. And then my body stopped treating sleep like it was an Olympic sport, like it was so important to sleep. It just, I started to return to sleep.
Wow, this is so helpful, Nora, because I think this is something that people ask us all the time. Like, okay, I get the neuroscience, I'm on board, but what do you do on a day-to-day basis? And it's so helpful to hear from people. And as you said, people take very different paths, and there are different, obstacles that different people
Yeah.
have to overcome. But for you, it sounds like a combination of the neuroscience education, somatic tracking to attend to sensations in a very different way with that curiosity, compassion, the gradual reintroduction of things that you trained your brain to fear,
Hmm.
the brain retraining essentially, and then the safety affirmations for building that, I guess, felt sense of safety to support you with insomnia. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for talking us through that. And then Sam, what about you? What was it like implementing the science? What did you do to bring that science to life?
Yeah, it's a great question. I found it really aggravating for a long time because I was like, I want the perfect way to get better, and I will do every single thing that is necessary for many hours at a time. And that actually, as I mentioned before, is not helpful. And so Alan Gordon, who wrote a wonderful book called The Way Out, mentions, there's sort of a trust the process part of this kind of work. And so I took what worked for me from all of the many experts in the field. So there's not really for me one doctor, one provider, one anything that is the perfect way to get better. Having it customized to me, I think, was helpful. And so I started out with education, same as Nora, really just trying to understand what this meant, how it works with the brain, what does that mean? And then I went into doing meditation every morning. And for me, that meant returning to psychological safety. There were a lot of traumas in my life that I had not processed or sort of pretended were not a big deal that I needed to get through. And that was working with, a therapist to deal with those, processing those. And then in meditation, really focusing specifically on messages of safety, which comes up a lot in neuroplastic symptom relief. and trying to get my body to feel safe and not constantly 100% on edge all the time. And so doing that, doing somatic tracking was very hard for me. I think it's really helpful. I personally was kind of angry at the idea of befriending my pain or becoming curious about my pain because I thought that was ridiculous. I would just kind of, I would try sometimes and then stop and I couldn't do it. And so, but I knew that I sort of kept coming back to it and trying again. And same as Nora, I would be like, it's red, it's angry, I'm mad. What is the feeling there? Grief, anger. And that, however, over time, I started to see some differences in the way my mind was actually working. So, for instance, I'm someone who is deeply self critical and did not think self love was a possibility even at all, ever in my lifetime. However, doing meditations and affirmations that are truly just repeating messages of safety, messages of self love, essentially became another voice in my head. What that would then talk back to if some, my mind is telling me I'm terrible, I'm an awful person, whatever. It then is saying, no, actually, we don't need to think that. We can think, we can love ourselves. We can, and it wasn't my first thought, but it would then kind of talk back to it. Within that, I then started engaging more and more in physical activity and in being active in my life. And so that meant going to the gym, being able to come back to lifting or running or walking or something like that was really helpful. And I think there's just so many different tools in the toolbox that I use now. So maybe somatic tracking is not working for me today. We'll try journaling, we'll try meditating, we'll try something else that kind of whatever is working for me in that moment. And I think there were a lot of messages that I sent to myself that I would kind of practice on a day to day. So the concept of like your needs are your north. I think that might have been on the Like Mind, Like Body podcast. There are so many amazing people in this space who I have learned things from. So I'm trying to remember who I learned them from. But it's the concept of let's try to put my oxygen mask on first. Let's try to take care of myself first. And then we can kind of scan the room and try to help others in the space. Because I was really not in the practice of trying to help myself in any way. And then separately, it was making boundaries with people in my life for whom I had never had any boundaries. And those are really difficult because it is also a feeling of loss for the friend or family member who is then experiencing the boundary. And so that took a really long time, and it's still something that I work on and struggle with. But each of these pieces kind of brought together to a life where I'm taking care of myself. There is work with myself for how to achieve safety day to day. And it kind of is also ever changing. But what eventually I came to was also letting go of being the perfect patient, letting go of having the perfect way of being. Because now, if I have a symptom come up, I'm like, it's okay. I've been through this, I've been through worse. I can either do a meditation or I can get on my heating pad and just kind of relax. Maybe my body needs rest because I also was never allowing myself to rest for even a moment. And so recognizing rest is sacred. I mean, there's sort of endless little pieces that kind of came together, but those are the different things I did day to day.
Wow, I am so glad that you shared about self-compassion and self-care because I think people can really underestimate the importance of that. It is so hard to feel safe within your mind and your body if you are constantly beating up on
Oh,
yourself, and not attending to the needs of your own body, like simple things like rest and relaxation. And this is how I live too, like super self-critical, always pushing through, never attending to needs. And we learn on this journey just how important that is. So thank you so much for sharing everything you did, or at least an overview of what you did. And
yeah.
hopefully those things, I think they really are. Self-compassion, I think, is at the heart of my body healing.
It really is. And I really felt during it, I was like, why do I have to like myself? I don't need to do this. Why can't I just keep pushing forward? And self love, which I'm telling you, until 30, I was never something I ever thought I could even get close to, and it is something I definitely feel like I embody now, and has also made me a better partner, a better friend, a better community member, a better family member. Is really at the heart of it for me, I'd say.
If anybody out there is struggling with self-compassion, because I also really struggled with that, a book I highly recommend that really changed my thinking It's called Scarcity Brain by Michael Easter. It is not really about the neuroplastic world, but once you're in this space, you start to realize a lot of self-help type books are actually related to this. And so this book was really all about like the evolutionary nature of human beings. Why did we evolve the way we evolved? Why do we need information and need food and need to accumulate stuff? Like for me, it really explained, consumerism and information seeking and overeating. Like it explained a lot of these things in a evolutionary way that was really what helped me generate self-compassion because it wasn't like self-compassion, I love myself. It was more self-compassion, this is the human condition. This is why we are here for survival, and we've kind of out evolved our bodies in many ways. And so how do you deal with that? And for me, that really inspired a lot of self-compassion. So just a plug
That's like
there.
self acceptance, really. It's sort of
Yeah,
accepting of the human condition. And I
right.
think for viewers, it's so obvious between Nora and I how different these journeys were and how different we're even thinking about treatment and how different these are impacting our daily lives. So it just sort of goes to show how it can be very personalized to you.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Recovery looks different for each person. It's so unique, and it's great to hear these different stories. And I think people connect with different elements of different stories, and they learn something from each story. So I'd just love to kind of carry on that theme, actually. So you did have different journeys, use slightly different approaches. It certainly took a different length of time. Nora, your journey was relatively short, although you'd had the symptoms for a long, long time. And Sam, for you, healing took longer, and that was exactly my situation too. I think I spent a big chunk of my 30s actually healing. So I'd love you both to just reflect on the factors that you think affected the length and perhaps the smoothness of that journey. So perhaps starting with you, Nora, what do you think kind of eased the path for you there?
Hmm. It's a great question, and it's so hard to know, right? But my theory is really about two main factors. One is that I'm someone that really respects authority figures. I would always get really nervous when I would get called on by, a teacher at school. And so I think that the fact that my clinical trial was delivered by Dr. Michael Danino, who I respected from a traditional sense, like he was an emergency medicine physician associated with Beth Israel hospital, and I think I just respected him, and I was like, well, if this person who is an authority figure who's well trained is telling me that this is legit, then I am inclined to believe them. So I think, and that might not be the case for everyone else. Some people might be resistant to that type of authority figure. But for me personally, him delivering this information made me a lot more receptive than if I had, found it from, and it's funny because I'm a yoga teacher now, but if a yoga teacher delivered that information to me, I might be like, no, that's a little spiritual or not really for me. So that was one thing. The other was, and I think this is the part where it's really hard to compare and contrast. And it sounds from both of our stories that like, both Sam and I were ready for change. So I can't say that, that's the number one thing that explains it, but I was just in the right place, right time. Like I mentioned in my recovery story that I was at a mental rock bottom. Like I really felt like I was losing my mind when I was in Portugal and I was so anxious. I was like hyperventilating at night. I wasn't enjoying my vacation. I remember I gave a friend a call who I hadn't talked to in a long time and I was like shaking and kind of on the verge of tears. Like I just felt like there's no way I can go on like this. Like this cannot be my life. And I think that like rock bottom just made me so like receptive. And again, I had tried meditation before, like it didn't work for me. And so I think it was just a matter of right time, right place. This started to explain a lot of it, and I was desperate for an explanation.
Yeah, same with me. That gift of desperation that Nicole Sachs talks about, how it just opens up the mind. And what about you, Sam? What are the kind of factors that you think maybe led to your journey being a little bit longer, maybe a little bit more up and down? Do you have any insights there?
Yeah, a bit, I think. I mean, I was in a very similar place to Nora. 9 years of relentless pain. I was so angry all the time. I was so tired and sad and full of grief. And so I was ready. I did not find it through a doctor in the same way as Nora, so perhaps that might have been. And that is a piece that I really care about. I want providers across the world to be mentioning this earlier on when someone has any kind of symptom or pain. And for me, I also, again, another thing I haven't spoken about publicly that much is that I have really severe OCD. And it's a very specific form of intrusive thoughts. It is not one that's talked about very much, but it does lead to a lot of checking, checking all the time. Is this happening? Is this, because mine are sort of these intrusive thoughts of death constantly, which are really horrible. But part of the therapy for OCD actually is exposure therapy, where you're becoming more comfortable with something and you're having the fear lessen, which is actually very similar to neuroplastic symptom relief. But in trying to get better from neuroplastic symptoms, I think the level of checking and the level of obsessing might have been, a little bit exacerbated by having OCD. So it's possible that having these sort of two things at one time that are really pushing you in one direction might have made it take longer. I also think that it was just, I just needed more time. And there were a lot of big changes I had to make to my life that I was not ready to make. I was not ready to make certain boundaries. I was not, like, a lot of the things that I think are so clear in neuroplastic symptom relief, I was not ready to engage with. And so I think I just took a longer time. And I'm fine that it took a longer time. Of course, we all want to be out of symptoms sooner. But I think I needed that time to learn all that neuroplastic symptom relief had to give me. And I'm so glad for it. And of course, like, it did take longer than Nora, and you and I sort of perhaps had similar amounts of time that it took. But I think in the end, it just might have been my personality, the way that I am, just needed more time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't force healing. There's no deadline. And actually, the more pressure that you put upon yourself to make it happen more quickly, it's actually just really counterproductive, isn't it? So just nurturing that sense of, I guess, self-patience and kindness and, compassion for yourself and gentleness, that is part of the journey. It just can't be rushed, however much we would understandably like to get rid of these debilitating symptoms. It just does take time. And I think for anybody who's watching this that feels they've had a long journey so far, to know that doesn't rule you out. You can still recover, you can still make a meaningful change to your symptoms. That's certainly what happened for me. And I just had a lot to unlearn, a lot of things I'd heard in the medical model about what my symptoms meant, tests that I'd done, things that doctors had said to me. It took a long time to unlearn that, and then also to shift quite ingrained thinking patterns and habits that were dysregulating for the nervous system. It took time, and now I can't ever say that I'm going to be grateful for that lost decade of pain, but I am definitely grateful for the things that I learned during the recovery years of different ways of living my life that are more mindful, more joyful, more self-compassionate.
Yeah, I agree with that, actually, because of course, it's hard to look at it as much of a gift, but it is. I think of it now as like my body being like, you need to take care of yourself. Well, you're not going to do it for yourself, apparently. So I'm going to tell you that you need to rest, you need to be kind to yourself, you need to do all of these things. And if you're not going to do it, I will keep telling you. Is sort of how I've matured in my thinking of the way in which I interact with my symptoms, which if I had said that to myself 5 years ago, I would have been really angry and been like, don't talk to me, you're making fun of me, essentially. But that's what it was. I think another piece that took longer for me was that I really got to pain free after, maybe 8 months. And then I had a big extinction burst because someone had mentioned a very obscure disease that I might have. And that then sent me way back. I was like, oh my gosh, now I have to find out if I have this. And eventually I got to the point where it was like, no, you became pain free. You became without symptoms with neuroplastic symptom relief. This is just sort of going back into that fear pain cycle. But I didn't really understand these extinction bursts, these big flares. I thought that meant that this was not working for me, and luckily did eventually kind of come back to the work and come back to this kind of treatment. And went back to feeling better. But that was another piece that I think extended it for me.
Well, bravo you for sticking with it because it's
Ah,
not necessarily an easy path, is it? But I think
no.
when we see that we are making some progress, whereas before, we weren't really making any progress, that can kind of inspire us to keep going, to deal with those setbacks and those hurdles, because the journey is often not linear with mind body recovery. That's what we see time and time again in this community, that it's often not a linear journey. So it takes a lot of resilience to keep going.
And something
Yeah.
I ask myself now, and then Nora, you can jump in, is if I'm doing something and I'm feeling perhaps some pain, I'm thinking instead of, oh, this hurts, what's going on here? It's what's happening in my life, what's going on in my emotional life, my psychological life, what's kind of going on beneath the surface. Journaling does really help with that, to try to see, is there something I haven't processed, something I haven't really gone through or thought through enough? And that's been another sort of helpful daily thing.
No,
Mm.
absolutely. I mean, I think, Dr. John Sarno's kind of lasting um, uh, advice was just think physical and mental, think psychological, so it's just adding that in the model of, why might I not be feeling okay? But I did just want to mention that though I feel like I recovered very quickly, and I hope that that inspires some people that that is possible. It is also, as you said, Sarah, it's a lifelong journey. And so it's not like I recovered and I never had any bodily problems ever again. Like, no, there was, I think, a couple months after I felt fully recovered, I fully accepted this. I started to experience some bloating again. And I remember getting down that rabbit hole of, wait, what if there's this like herb that I should try that I read about on Reddit? Somebody chronicled this like really long story of how this specific herb like really helps digest. And then you start to get in that space again. And I think I wrote about it. There's a blog called tmswiki.org, I believe, and it's free. And it's a blog that I was just writing, and I was, meeting some great people. And somebody was like, you're kind of in it again, like you're in the fear again. And so it was helpful to have kind of an accountability partner, someone calling it out. And I think within just a few weeks, it just went away again, and I think the power of community is so strong. And the more people know about this, the more you can have these accountability partners, and make sure that you are well equipped to shorten the time of recovery every time a symptom arises, because your mind and body are constantly communicating. So you're going to get these messages forever.
Yeah, we are mind body connected for life. That's the human condition. And it is highly possible that something emotional or psychological could show up in your body. But I
Yep.
think that after the recovery journey, you just respond very differently when that happens. And even if you do initially go down a rabbit hole of fear, we've all done that, right? I've done it so many times. Um, Interrupting yourself as you're
Yep.
going down that rabbit hole and just meeting that with compassion because it's entirely natural, but then redirecting yourself and doing that again and again, really. And I find each time that something pops up, there's less fear because I know what this is. I know how to deal with it, but I'm going to be mind body connected forever.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
completely agree. It's actually something I broke my foot a few months ago, and it was really painful and really hurt. And I was afraid that it would become chronic. And I actually had a provider who told me after the foot had like the bones itself had healed, he was like, keep walking on it. It might be painful. You might have pain in a different part of the foot. Keep walking. You will be okay. The foot is okay. And so I really brought in neuroplastic work and his having a provider tell me that. So I walked on it, and for 3 more weeks, it was very painful in different parts of the foot. But I was like, I will be okay. The foot is healed. We can keep going. And now I feel like I would have shortened the time that I could have gotten better. And one more piece to mention is that having an accountability buddy, that's what's such a beautiful thing about working at Nervana with Nora, is that we check in with each other on how we're doing, how we're taking care of ourselves today, which I think is kind of a revolutionary thing in startups, to be checking in on rest and checking in on taking care of oneself, especially as two women running a startup. So that's just something I've got a lot of gratitude for right now.
Oh,
Me
I
too.
absolutely love that. And Claire and I, as co-directors at Living Proof, we do the same thing, and we both recovered from pelvic pain. So we have
Yeah.
that connection, and it is, it's a real gift. So I just love to move on and talk about Nirvana, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Nora, after this journey, you went on to create Nervana, which is a recovery tool for people healing chronic
Yeah.
symptoms, neuroplastic symptoms. And I know you designed this app really thoughtfully to guide people through the neuroscience that had helped you, to support them in using the recovery tools. So can you just tell us a bit about that, how you designed Nirvana to meet the needs that you once had as somebody healing chronic symptoms?
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you for giving me the space to do so. Um, the primary reason that I built Nirvana was personalization. I wanted everyone to have a personalized journey. I felt like there's so many resources out there that are so helpful, but sometimes they're, just about back pain. And, what if you have, a joint pain in your knee? Sometimes you need that personalization. And like we've discussed in this entire, call together, everyone has different blockers. For some people, it's unresolved childhood trauma. For some people, it's their personality patterns. For some people, it's, they just can't get in touch with their emotions. Like there's so many different factors here. Neuroplastic recovery is really about like looking inwards and trying to understand, the state of your mind and how that's communicating with your body. So it's kind of like vague work that needs distilling. And so I really wanted to recapitulate the clinical trial I was in because I felt so fortunate that I had had such a handheld experience. And there are fantastic mind, body, and neuroplastic recovery coaches out there and therapists. And we work a lot with them at Nervana as in between session support. But they can be a little inaccessible for some people. Maybe you don't have one in your area. Maybe it's a little expensive. And so we wanted Nervana to be a tool that people can use while they're seeing a provider or until they see a provider. So the way it works is pretty simple. Each day you have bite-sized education. And so this is, I built it to be very, very quick. I didn't want people to get really attached to recovery where they're reading novels. It's really just quick, few minutes of neuroscience-based education, pulling from the clinical trial I was in with the published results, pulling from pain reprocessing therapy, and then emotional awareness and expression therapy. So these are therapies that have had clinical evidence, randomized controlled trials showing their efficacy and the fact that they actually do work for many people. So pulling all of that into the app in this bite-sized, very digestible information, bringing in some nervous system regulation as well. So that's some provider-based meditations, somatic observation, and it's quite different from a traditional meditation app where it's not going to be focused on your chronic physical symptoms. And then really the crux of the app is this Nervana AI coach. And so this Nervana AI coach, it's voice to voice conversations, about 10 to 15 minutes. So they're quite short, but they're really there to help you develop a personalized plan for what you should be focusing on. A lot of people want to know, what do I actually do to get started? And this AI coach is trained with the help of hundreds of providers that we've worked with, as well as our clinical advisor, as well as all of these clinical research modalities put together in this AI coach that's able to really personalize your next step, distills it to make it super simple. Like you might talk to the coach and say, I am really afraid of running and I'm really frustrated that I can't exercise anymore. And the coach might understand where that's coming from, talk a little bit about it, and then say, okay, how about the next day or whenever you have time, why don't you just visualize putting on your running shoes? And so that little bite-sized experiment to teach your brain that it's safe, that it doesn't need to be sending these protective signals in the form of symptoms, is really what we're hoping to achieve. And then after, there's some reflection exercises, there's affirmations, and it's meant to just be a very structured, bite-sized program.
I love that. And I think it's what people are asking for a lot when they approach us. They say, I found this approach, I understand the neuroscience. I still don't really understand what to do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And to have a service that walks them through that, that provides the exercises, the support, that you can ask questions and get personalized feedback. That I mean, it's just so valuable in this space. But just thinking about the AI and anybody who might have concerns perhaps about using AI, like perhaps sharing health information with AI or getting advice from AI rather than from a human doctor who's been, trained medically for many years. What would you say to help people who might have some concerns about that?
Definitely. I mean, the first thing is that this AI coach is not replacing medical care whatsoever. So we always recommend strongly that before you come to Nervana, you should go to your medical doctor. You should rule out structural injury, tissue damage, try everything. And like you said, Sarah, I would love for Nervana to be first line of defense and not last line treatment. But at the same time, I recognize that that comes with some risk. And so I would rather people go exhaust their options and then come back and work on their nervous system and their brain body connection. So that's first thing is that this is a coach that helps you with mind body principles and applying them to your daily life, but it is not medical care.
Mhm.
Secondly, there is an ability for us on the technical side to really think thoroughly about safety guardrails, medical guardrails. So the coach is highly trained to not cross certain boundaries. This is not your best friend. This is not a 24/7 companion. This is a mind body coach that helps walk you through education and applying that to your daily life. We also allow these insights to be exported to your provider in the form of a PDF if you're working with someone. So we're really trying to bring the AI insights into your medical care as part of a collaborative care model. And then finally, I would just say try it out. I mean, we give people 3 days free anyways. I know that AI can be a little bit scary. And, I think we're doing as best as we can to make it as responsible and safe as possible. But ultimately, we're really just trying to use AI for good. People are using it anyways. That's how the world is going. And I'd rather people use Nervana's AI, which is really curated and there's a lot of human thought and providers behind it, rather than, just going to ChatGPT and working, with this black box of you don't know what it's going to tell you. And so that's, I would just say try it out. We're trying to just use it for personalization.
Absolutely. And I do just want to be upfront that Nervana is one of our affiliate partners, and we choose our partners very carefully. So we choose products that are very much grounded in that evidence-based neuroscience that provide an excellent user experience, as Nervana does. We test the products that we recommend. They use recovery practices that we ourselves used on our journey. So we're very careful and intentional there. So just want to be very honest about that. So if somebody does want to try Nervana after hearing your stories and hearing a little about the app, how would they go about doing that?
Yes. So, since you are one of our partners, so we do want to offer people $50 off the annual plan. So you can do that by going on our website, trynervana.com. So that's trynervana.com/living proof. And you'll get an offer in your email, and then you can get started 3 days for free, and then choose if you want to continue.
Lovely. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you to both of you for sharing your inspiring stories to help other people who are going through something similar, and for all the work that you do at Nervana to try to help people who are in the shoes that you were once in. And for just coming on and helping to raise hope for recovery, even if that journey does take a little longer, like it did for you and me, Sam. But yeah, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Really appreciate you giving us the space.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And Nora and I are behind the social media accounts and the emails. So feel free to email us with any questions. We love chatting about this.
Thank you both. I'll drop all the details in the description below so that people can find you easily. Thank you again.